Good evening. I believe we are live on YouTube. I'm Faye D'Souza. Thank you for joining us. It's a really important conversation, and we've tried to get as many voices as we could who understand the matter better than anyone else. The government has announced a new education policy just yesterday. It's called the National Education Policy, or the NEP. We'll hear a lot of people talking about NEP 2020. That's the government's new education policy, and it overhauls really the way education is currently being administered across the country. There are big changes that have been made. We've got a great lineup of guests, and I'll get to our guests in a second, but I just want to read out what we have really as the big changes that have happened, that have been announced in this policy. Well, the first change that was announced is the Ministry of HRD, or Human Resource Development, will now be called the Education Ministry. That's one change. The second point was, of course, languages. And you'll remember last year in May, the draft was released, and the draft basically said that Hindi will be taught compulsorily in all schools. And a lot of states, especially the southern states, protested. So this, final version has changed that Hindi imposition. It says actually very clearly that no language will be imposed on any state. It also says that, there will be greater flexibility in the three-language formula. Three languages will be learned based on the choice of the state, and two out of those three languages need to be Indian languages. Sanskrit will also be, made available as an option in all schools at all levels. Now, it says, and here, this was the point really that caused a lot of debate. The actual text says, whenever possible, medium of instruction up to grade 5 will be the mother tongue or the regional language. Now, the press release put out by the PIB actually said that compulsorily everybody will be instructed in the mother tongue up to the 5th standard, and that caused a lot of confusion. But it turns out that whenever possible would again depend on the state government and the school in question, and whether or not that sort of instruction is possible and whether it can be made available. Also, there will be a regulator for all schools, private and public, that will also regulate fees, and that's been a big demand of parents for a while. There'll be one regulator for all colleges as well. And right to education will now extend from the age 3 to the age 8. Here's the interesting thing. Now, up till now, we've done 10 plus 2, right? 10 years of school and 2 years of junior college. It will now be broken down into 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. This brings nursery as well into the school curriculum, and a total of 15 years of schooling that students will have to go through. And that's an interesting point as well. Exams have been softened, and children will be allowed to take their board exams in class 10 and 12 twice in the year. And it also allows students in high school and in college to do a mix and match of subjects. So you could mix 2 science subjects with 1 art subject. And that's interesting, but I wonder how colleges are going to actually provide that service, and that's going to be interesting to talk about as well. The MPhil degree has been abolished. In its place is a 4-year undergraduate course. Now, you could study undergraduate for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Now, this basically also perhaps looks out for the dropouts. So if you study for 1 year, you get a certificate. 2 years, you get a diploma. 3 years, you get your bachelor's certificate. And 4 years, you get bachelor's with research, which is effectively the equivalent of an MPhil. So several other smaller points. There's also a credit system that's been introduced and new regulators that will be brought in. But our point is to try and figure out how much of this will solve India's real problems, the problems that India has been facing with education so far. To help us understand and answer those questions, I have guests with me right now. Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who is a professor at JNU, bringing in the higher education and the education point of view. Professor Saumen Chattopadhyaya, who also is with the Zakir Husain Center of Educational Studies at JNU. Sherly, who is a principal of the St. Madhavdas Amersey High School in Andheri West. Gurumurthy Kasinathan, who is the founder director of IT for Change, who's done a lot of work in education as well, and Anubha Sahai, who's the president of India-wide Parents Association. I welcome all of you to this conversation, and thank you so much for giving me your time. I just want to take this piece by piece, if I may understand. And the question really is, do you see this, I know it's a lot, but do you see this NEP, or National Education Policy, as a good thing? And do you see any challenges going forward? As a parent, Anubha Sahai, I'll start with you. What do you see as challenges, if any?
See, this NEP is a good step, no doubt, but there are many flaws in the policy that needs to be taken care. And the main problem which I feel is that the implementation part. I don't know how this policy is going to be implemented. Nothing has been clarified in the new education policy also. That how are they going to implement this policy? They have done a lot of changes in the policy that students will be there who can choose their medium and all. And but as far as the teachers training is concerned, they have not explained anything. They have just said that yeah, teachers will be trained, but how they are going to train, how much time it will take, when it will be implemented. During such pandemic, right now it is not possible to open the schools. I don't think schools will open for another 6 months or a year. And how this policy they are going to implement? Well, they should start with the training of the teachers that they have not clarified. So main problem which we think that the policy will have is the implementation part. Secondly, the medium of instruction which they are seeing shall be left the state. They can decide the medium of instruction. I think then there will be a lot of uncertainty and there will be no uniformity. Right now in state board, the medium of instruction is as per the state language, the local language. But as far as central board, ICC boards are concerned, in all these schools, there is a uniformity that the medium of instruction is English and Hindi also. That is optional. But if the government is planning to change the medium of instruction and they are going to leave it to the state to decide, then there will be a lot of chaos. Students will be like those in transferable job will face a lot of issues while moving to some other state. From Maharashtra, if someone moves to Karnataka, then medium of instruction, I don't know whether that student will be able to study or not. Across India, if they are going to bring such kind of policy, that they are going to change the medium of instruction in central board schools, then this will create a lot of chaos. So uniformity is what we demand, which is there in colleges also. The medium of instruction is English. So that is what I would say and suggest also.
Okay, so I do want to remind our viewers that while there was a fair amount of confusion about medium of instruction, it says very clearly whenever possible. Let me bring in the rest of the panel as well. Guru, what do you feel? Have you had the chance to read through the entire document? Do you believe that there will also be? Do you also believe that there will be challenges in implementation?
Yes, I think the purpose of a policy document is to enunciate a vision. I think that's important to understand. That's why you need to have something like a national policy. So certainly the policy is going to be ambitious. It's going to want an education system that is equitable, that delivers for everybody, and that allows the real aims of education to be fulfilled. So certainly the implementation will be a challenge. I would like to focus on what I think will be the most critical part of the challenge, and that's simply fuel for the vehicle. You know, one of the biggest challenges we have had in the last 70 years of Indian education system is in 1966, a commission set up on a national policy said at least 6% of the GDP should be invested in education, and it was very clear that it has to be government money. Unfortunately, and this is a tragedy that we have never crossed more than 4.2% of the GDP. Maybe there was in a couple of years. Mostly we are 3%. That is half the amount required. Now you have all the ambition in the world, and you want to starve the system and expect it to succeed. It's completely going to be a pipe dream. And there, I think that is the challenge that the policy will have. The policy has clearly recommended that there should be public investment, and it's gone beyond 6%. And I think the challenge will be, even the current government, the budgets have actually come down. It's around 3% or so right now. It was for some 10 years back. I think that will be the biggest challenge for the implementation. If there is no money, what are we talking about?
So actually the implementation is the budget. In fact, that's one of the questions that's coming from our viewers who have said, do we have the money? Intentions might be great, but can we really afford this? Do we have the money to actually see this come into play? And like pointed out earlier, this is going to be about training teachers, about re-strategizing schools, about actually investing money in education. An interesting point here is that the Anganwadis have now been included in nursery schooling, which means that whatever it's difficult to call it a syllabus in nursery schools, but whatever is being taught to your children in nursery schools, the equivalent of that should also be taught to children in Anganwadis by Anganwadi workers, which means we have to train them. And before we train them, it would be nice if the government paid them and then trained them to do more work than they're already doing. Let me bring in Professor Mehrotra. Professor Mehrotra, the question about whether we can afford this, and it's not really clear when this comes into play. Is it this year? Is it next year? Is it a few years from now? Will schools and colleges and universities be given time to acclimatize? How would this play out?
I'm sure it's supposed to come in straight away. I'm sure what the government has in mind, that it's been trying to put together for 6 years, that it's been in power, an NEP. It's now finally got there. It's got barely 3.5 years left. So it has to go in right away. So I'll come back to the finance later.
Yes.
But let me make some very big picture points about each of the levels of education, because I don't think we can just deal with school education. First of all, the good news. Finally, the Ministry of Education has understood that early childhood development is absolutely critical. They have finally understood that the Anganwadis which were doing preschool education so far, that was the least important of the 6 functions that they performed. So I'm delighted by the fact that we are finally understanding how profoundly important for the future development and earnings of each of us is ECC. Unfortunately, that's where the good news stops. Let me turn to school education. The biggest point about school education that has constantly bedeviled our school education and learning levels is the fact of teacher absenteeism. Nationwide surveys by both the government as well as independent bodies across the country from 2004 onwards still have demonstrated without a shadow of doubt that teacher absenteeism is of the order of 26%, worse in rural areas, worse in the Jharkhands and UP Bihars, and less in Tamil Nadu. If you don't get your teachers to school, you're not going to achieve anything, period. There's no, substituting teacher presence and actual teacher who know something and who've been taught with state school board exams, which is what this policy says, that in grades 3, 5, 8, which I'm not so sure, I'm not entirely delighted about 3, 5. Yes, grade 8 is good. Maybe grade 5 is good, but get the teachers out there, first of all. Let me turn very quickly to higher education. The goal of higher education, gross enrollment ratio to 50% by 2030. That's 10 years from now. We are currently at 26, 27%. We already are seeing the disaster that higher education is, because we went from 11% GER in 2006 to 26% in 2017. And now we want to double it to 50%. It's not as though our higher education standards were great in 2006. They precipitously fell from disastrous levels already when we massified higher education. Now we want to go to 50%. We have to be clearly not living in India, or we don't want anything serious for our higher education. Point 4, about vocational education, which is least understood, it seems, by the people who've written this document. And this is related to the higher education. You must not go to 50% higher education enrollment, because you need to increase enrollment at vocational education. You need to start streaming your 10th graders towards vocational education. This country, there are only 2.4% of the country's workforce who have formally acquired vocational training, despite Skill India. So this goal in vocational education, that by 2025, 50% of our schools, children will have exposure to vocational education, is simply doesn't match up with the finances that will be required. And in any case, we must not go for 50% GER at higher education. Finally, because I've already taken too much time, because I could dwell on each one of these points much more. Finance. I think Gurumurthy rightly said, we've never exceeded 4%, 4.2% of GDP. We've been talking about 6% of GDP since the Kothari Commission in 1966. This government is bankrupt. It's not even putting money into the people's hands. We need increase in aggregate demand. You've heard me say this, Faye, in your earlier shows. If you don't increase aggregate demand, your economy will not grow. The government will not have revenues. You can forget about 6% of GDP. Thank you. I'm stopping here for the moment.
Quick question to you, Professor Mehrotra. Does the matter of education come under state, center, concurrent list? What is, who has jurisdiction to decide what our students study?
It's a concurrent subject. It's a concurrent subject.
It's a concurrent subject. All right, let me
which is how both center allocates funds and the states allocate funds. But the states allocation of funds account for 85 to 90% of total education expenditure in the country.
Well, let me also ask Professor, Professor Chattopadhyaya, if I may, what your challenges are, or what you see as challenges with this, with this document that has come out. Is it just very ambitious, or is this something that we can start implementing right away?
I think the way higher education reform has been envisaged, it entails a massive overhauling of the system. Massive. It's a reconfiguration of the entire system. And there lies the challenge. The first challenge that I can foresee is the policy prescription about the governance reform. Each and every university should have a board of governors, BOG, and each and every university has to design an institutional development plan which has to be submitted to the Higher Education Grants Council. This means that every university has to revisit the governance structure. And then the question of affiliation. So basically the way the entire system has been designed, has been intelligently designed, is that the teachers and the institutions should have the autonomy. And then you have got the 4 pillars. That means the Higher Education Grants Council, National Higher Education Regulation Commission. Then you have got the National Accreditation Council. All these 4 very important institutions have to coordinate among each other. And then every institution has to undergo the massive governance change. And governance change is going to be registered by majority of the universities. Then the overall plan, I'm quite satisfied with, very ambitious plan. But unless the public funding is raised, it's not going to be very, very fruitful. In a way, I can see the online education, the distance education is being promoted. The way the foreign universities are going to be invited to enter the Indian higher education system, I doubt whether the public funding would at all be increased for higher education, right? And even if it is increased for education as a whole, higher education may not get a good share from the increased budgetary allocation. So the challenge will be implementation, this construction of these important pillars, the way it has been envisaged, very important regulatory institutions, Higher Education Grants Council, and the governance reform at each and every institution. These are the major challenges that I feel. It's going to be registered. It needs quite a lot of effort to make it a meaningful higher education reform.
I also want to ask you about the discontinuing of the MPhil degree and the 4-year bachelor's degree. What is your opinion on that? Is there any challenge there? Because it sounds like a good idea on paper for those of us who are not in the education sector.
Right now, what we have in JNU, 2 years of MPhil followed by 4 years of PhD, and many students, they cannot submit within 6 years. They take an extension, they join university under the clause 9B. So maybe it goes beyond 6 years. But what we have found that the training at the master's level is so poor, very often doing a MPhil does help the student to write the PhD. But it ends up consuming 1 more year, I understand. So in that case, the first year of training that we impart to the students who are admitted to the MPhil PhD program should be very, very rigorous, should be taken very, very seriously. That means the students have to be extremely serious, proactive, to do their PhD within a span of 3 to 4 years. But when they're writing a research paper in the 4th year of the undergraduate program, that is a 4-year program now, possibly that kind of MPhil training we expect from the student would be somewhat achieved if they're writing an essay or writing a research paper in the 4th year of the undergraduate program. That is the idea. But it's a good direction because we end up spending 6 to 7 years to get a PhD, and students have to wait pretty long to enter the job market. That is not done. Let us revamp the system. Let us get rid of MPhil so that the students and we all together work so that the PhD can be submitted within a reasonable time period, which is internationally comparable, 5 to 6 years.
Professor Mehrotra, the change of the fact that even college dropouts from the degree, curriculum will still get certificates. So 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you'll get a certificate. How many of those years how you finish? What's your response to that?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question, Faye. Yeah, they'll get a certificate. So I don't see where the problem is there.
Okay, so is that a good format in the removal of the MPhil altogether? Do you see that as a positive thing as well?
I think Saumen was right on the MPhil. I don't disagree with Saumen. But on the 1-year certificate, the 2-year diploma, the 3-year degree, that is an established standard format globally and in India, and it's doing fine. Yeah, I don't see a problem there.
You don't see a problem there. All right, let me just bring in the one teacher principal we have on the panel. Shirley Paul is with us. She is the principal of a high school. Ms. Paul, again, a lot of this is going to take restructuring in schools. When you looked at the document, was there anything stand out for you that you saw was positive and anything that you saw as negative?
See, I look at the entire NEP as a positive approach. I put it in one sentence this way. It's a qualitative approach towards a quantitatively large population. It's like a dream come true in case if it is implemented properly. The aspect of implementation will be the biggest question mark. It has been thought over very well. In terms of like it covers up the Bloom's taxonomy of how the child, when the child is born up to the age of 5, the maximum psychomotor skills and effectual domain of learning, all that is covered up. And then the child moves higher to the standard 3rd onwards, then the development in the other aspects. It's very nicely framed. This gives me a feeling like it's framed well, but what about the training aspect, the induction of teachers to this level? Are the teacher trainers already given this feedback, like how the entire procedure will change? Everything will have to be looked at in a different way. I mean, you have to take care of the performance management will be a question mark. When the RTE was implemented, there was something called a CCE, that is continuous comprehensive evaluation. For that itself, it took a number of years, 2009, and by 2012, the training started, and by 2013, it started implementing. So they said, open book test, because there are many features in the testing tool there. It took so many years for it to just get implemented. Here, this is like such a big, ambitious model. A good model, no doubt about it. It's a very good model, but provided it is, if you are training the teachers, first the teacher educators, they have to reframe their curriculum. They have to reframe their attitude towards teacher training, because it is no longer bookish learning. It is no longer structured learning. It is no longer emphasis on rote memory. Now, RTE also had the same, but unfortunately, it couldn't be replayed. It cannot be, we couldn't see the fruits of RTE. Now that they've come with an educational policy, performance management would be the major criteria in the teacher training institutes. They will have to think about qualitative methods of reaching out and improvising on the techniques of teaching from what they used to do, paper, pencil, or maybe simple testing. Now comes a situation where the application of mind will be important, analysis of the knowledge learned will be important, evaluating that and creating something new. So there is scope for the entire Bloom's taxonomy in place in this policy. No doubt. I mean, Bloom's taxonomy can be very well implemented. And another thing is also the brain, the maturity of the brain. Like when I read through it, I like that part. Is like until the frontal brain is evolved, there's a lot of emotional development that is going on in the process of the school learning. So if in case real emphasis can take place, real implementation can take place, I think it would be a good one. But the challenge is still teachers are not trained at all. The infrastructure is not up to the mark for this type of a learning. The strength of the school is so much, so big. And at this particular moment, now that it is COVID, we are doing online. Okay, so everything is online. Even with the online, we are talking certain things are going to have an online effect. Now the online itself, we are struggling to reach to the child. So in this background, and with the less finances coming from the center or the generated finances within the school, all this would just remain as a dream unless many NGOs and many like-minded people start coming together, brainstorming, because at least if they're going to implement by 2021, the training has to begin now. The training has to begin from this month itself. You have to start, because there are a number of teachers involved. There are a number of people involved in this now. It's like that you just put the thing on paper, but without even thinking what will be the way it can move. From the teacher training, the teachers come out, the teachers come into the school, their attitudinal change has to take place. Those who are already in the school, they are with the same old pattern of thinking. Now there should be a change of mindset there, and then the takeover from what was and what is today to what will be for tomorrow. It's going to be a gigantic effort.
Ms. Paul, you said 2021. Has the school or has your school received intimation that this is to be implemented from next academic year?
No. We have just got this particular as a PDF, that same infographic PPT, which was given to all through all the WhatsApp group it is running. The same came to us through our department, nothing more. And nothing at all, except in the previous time, last year, we had an opportunity to give our say for the evolvement of NEP. We did have a say in that, no doubt about it.
And in your opinion, Ms. Paul, how many years do you think it's going to take for this to be implemented properly? If you were to say, okay, I need 2 years in order to bring this into my school, how many years?
It will minimum take 5 years. It will minimum take 5 years, starting with the training of the teachers, starting with the curriculum of, not training, curriculum in the teacher training colleges. The curriculum will have to have a complete makeshift. Then to the teachers coming in, and then the entire society also to have to be involved in it. There is a concept of personal effectiveness, because see, now from rote memory, you're talking about a level which is application, analysis, evaluation, creation. We are moving in this level, but it's a very nice, it's very good to imagine. I remember this, we had one experiment in my previous school where I was a teacher in Dominic Savvy. I still remember, where we had applied this and we could see the effect, but the effort part on the teacher is double. Because there are so many aspects. Apart from completing the portion, the child has to come out with something new. And if the teacher is not even able to understand the child will be shunned and say, no, you're doing wrong. So that mentality, whatever the child creates, is his or her own original.
Okay.
To accept it is very difficult. So mindset and attitudinal change is a must. Skill and hand.
Okay. I just want to open this up. Yes, I want to open this up, if I may, to the whole panel. And I also want to ask you about the changes in regulation. Now, we know that Higher Education Commission of India is going to be introduced, and it will be a single overarching umbrella for the entire higher education, except for medical and legal education. Everybody else will come under this umbrella. What would this mean? And is this a good thing, a bad thing? How do we process this information? Professor Chattopadhyaya?
You see, the draft National Education Policy very clearly pointed out that the regulation has failed to deliver quality in Indian higher education. It was quite evident from the proliferation of the fake journals and the way the teachers delivered what they were supposed to be doing. the regulatory mechanism that existed and that exists even today was very severely criticized by the draft national education policy. Now, the National Knowledge Commission, Yashwal Committee, they have been mentioning over the years that we need to have a single regulatory authority. Because, one of the major diagnoses of the ailment of the Indian higher education was the fragmentation of the system. Public-private divide, general professional divide, and this division within the higher education system did not allow the system to function coherently, right? There were lack of linkages. So in order to ensure better coordination, it has been suggested earlier also that we should have only one single regulatory authority. And the regulation and funding should not go together. So therefore, Higher Education Grants Council has been suggested that it's a new institution now in place of UGC and AICT. You have got a regulatory authority. You have got National Accreditation Council to ensure quality. And then you have got professional standard setting bodies in the form of, this GEC, General Education Council. They'll be looking at the quality. These are the four major pillars, and this is where the challenge lies, that you are going to restructure the higher education system very, very differently by constructing the four pillars and overarching framework. So this regulation, the National Education Policy is saying, is going to be light but tight. That means there will be very few regulatory compliances required on the part of the universities, but they're tight in the sense they have to be very strictly adhered to, very strictly complied by the. And how it is going to be complied? It is, say take the example of financial probity. That means all the institutions, public and private, have to make the budget uploaded in their respective website, as well as the government website, the Regulatory Council website, so that we can have a look at how these entities, non-profit organizations are functioning, how they are fixing the fees, and this financial probity and the various revelation about the processes that they undertake, right? If they are going to make it very, very transparent to the people, then the governance would improve because of the improvement in the accountability. And so this is the purpose of the regulatory body, that you are not going to unnecessarily interfere with the teachers functioning at the ground level. You are not going to unnecessarily interfere with the way the universities have been governed. You are giving them freedom, but they're trying to make sure that we are in a position to deliver by strictly complying with some of the regulations that they're insisting. This is the purpose of the regulatory revamping that has been suggested by the NEP.
All right.
Yes.
Anubha Sinha, from a parent's point of view, there are a lot of things here that were demanded by the Parents Association that has been met. A regulation, a national level regulation on the fees structure, for example, which is something that I know that you've been fighting for a while. Also, the idea that exams will not be as, as do or die as they have been up till now. There'll be two opportunities for students to take the 10th and the 12th standard examinations. It will also measure their core competence rather than just rote learning. Are these things that you are happy with?
She has to unmute herself.
Anubha, I believe you're muted.
No, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so we are quite satisfied with some kind of regulations which they are bringing in, like the students can appear for exam twice in a year, and also the assessment part which the government has brought in this regulation. New education policy is also a good step. But as far as fee regulation is concerned, for which we are fighting since many years, and we have approached government also. More than 2 lakh students and parents have signed a petition also on change.org to have a central regulatory body like they have for colleges. On that ground, there is no clarity in this new education policy, whether all the schools will be regulated properly or not. Because fee regulation is what we need, there should be a transparency and all the schools should be regulated. Another aspect is that which we are emphasizing is on
just 1 second, sorry, forgive me for interrupting you, but there will be a new accreditation framework and an independent authority to regulate both public and private schools, which will also regulate the fee structure. So it has said that such an authority will come in.
Yeah, will come in, but I don't know when they are going to implement it, because last year also a draft was submitted by all the parents association to the HRD ministry, and after that NCPCR took cognizance and they have also framed a fee structure draft, which was I think 2 years back. This was almost 2 years back. The draft was the draft was prepared, and that was being sent to HRD. But they told us that you have to go and get in touch with your state authorities and your state government, then only it can be implemented. So I don't know whether now again, if they are saying that a regulatory body will be introduced, we'll again have to go to our state government and to plead them to give us approval. So I don't know how they're going to implement it. There is no clarity on what level this regulatory body will work. Central body will be there, then there will be a state level body, district level body. Nothing has been clarified in this new education policy, which we are demanding. And secondly, we are also demanding opening of KB schools for regular or general citizen. Right now, KB schools are limited to those who are working with central government, army officers and all. But as far as general public is concerned, they don't have access to KB schools. And we have been demanding that they should open, government should open maximum Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya Vidyalayas, so that general public can also take admission in those public schools. So government should focus on improving the quality of education in public schools, as well as they should open more number of KB schools across India. In each district, I suppose they should have one KB school. So that is what I'm trying to say. And another point which I would like to emphasize is on the online education system, which the government has been telling in this new education policy. Right now, the internet penetration in India is around 38%. 30 to 38% is the internet penetration in our country. So I don't know how they are going to implement this, online system. They will have to first create an infrastructure, which will take, I don't know, 2 to 5 years for creating this infrastructure for online facility. Then only students can have access to online education system.
All right, so I want to place another question before the panel, and I'll start with Professor Mehrotra and then go to Gurumurthy. Professor Mehrotra, is there a challenge here in the fact that there is no clarity on the timelines of any of this? We don't know if it's this year or next year. Is it going to be piecemeal brought in? At what point will it be brought in? There's no clarity on the kind of money that this will take and is talked about. And I think that fundamentally, the problem that we faced in higher education in India is the lack of seats. The reason why 12th standard board exams are so competitive is because there are only so many seats in Delhi University, and everybody wants those seats. There are only so many professional college seats, and everybody wants those seats. This policy doesn't really address that problem, does it?
Okay, so let me start with your last point. The only way you're going to reduce the competition to enter higher education is by diverting at least half of these youngsters at just after secondary level into vocational education. You know what happens in China and has been happening for some time, that after 9 years of general academic education, the children are supposed to take an exam to enter senior secondary. Now, then the senior secondary lasts for 3 years, 10, 11, and 12. Now, believe it or not, 48% of all students who take that exam enter vocational. And after 3 years, they are in jobs. The majority of them are in jobs. Of course, jobs are growing. Non-agricultural jobs are growing. They don't enter higher education. They don't need to enter higher education. So the competition is, I'm suggesting something very similar here. If you don't do that, you already have a widespread disaster in the space of higher education. This competition will never go away. This, desire to get 100%, forget about 99.5, will never disappear. I don't understand how this problem is going to be solved, because the government is not going to be investing enough for really quality higher education undergraduate institutions to be established. Is the government going to expand the sort of creation of a Miranda and of a St. Stephen's and the St. Xavier's and Madras Christian College across the country? I don't see that happening. The only way you're going to change this is by diverting them younger, earlier away to what the economy needs. You have a country where of the labor force, of the workforce, 2.4% of the workforce has any formal vocational training. That's a complete disaster. In China, in Korea, that number is 80, 90%. So let's get our sights right. They consulted me. This committee had consulted me on the subject of vocational education. They didn't listen at all. You look at the chapter on vocational education, it is tiny. So honestly, the only good news in this policy is what I began with, the early childhood development. Let me dwell a little bit on that, because even there are real issues, and you flagged some of them. You see, what the good news is that a very significant proportion of 3 to 6 year old children in our country are at Anganwadis. From about 2006 onwards, there was a massive increase of post a Supreme Court judgment in December 16, 2006, that only a quarter of 3 to 6 year olds are in Anganwadis, and we need to universalize. So we went from 6 lakh to 12, 13 lakh Anganwadis in a matter of 7 years, which is fantastic. So universalization happened. The problem is Anganwadis offer 6 services, 2 nutritional, 3 health services, and then there is preschool education. Now, what I take away from this policy is that there is a new emphasis on this. There is a new emphasis on the Anganwadi teachers who are less than 12th class pass to be given 1 year training.
Yeah.
For those who are 12th pass, they will still have 6 months training in preschool education, which is all much more very reassuring if that happens. And once that happens, then you will perhaps begin to see a certain quality in the preschool education, hence the preparation of these children, and when they enter class 1, and then therefore the dropout rates will begin to fall, and therefore their learning levels will fall. You see, why am I emphasizing this? Please try and understand the 2 very important reasons in our country which make early childhood development and this preschool education absolutely critical. This is apart from the global research which shows that early childhood development ensures higher learning levels, lower dropout rates for children, and higher earnings across your career. You see, in our country, when the children enter an Anganwadi, 1/3 of them are malnourished. 1/3. Secondly, if you are malnourished, these children's brains are not developed enough to learn. They don't learn. They sit there in class, often hungry, waiting for the midday meal to arrive, and then they will feel little better. Point 1. Point 2. Let's just remind ourselves that Census 2011 told us that our literacy rate after 60 years since independence was 74%, and that literacy rate is appalling literacy. Meaning, what do I mean by that? Padh lete ho, ek sentence likh lete ho. This is your test of literacy in the census, and 26% of our population, that means 311 million people, were illiterate in 2011. That number has fallen to about 250 million currently. What the meaning is that majority of these children are coming into school who are children of functionally illiterate parents. वो माहौल ही नहीं है घर पे, बेचारे सीखेंगे क्या? So illiterate. On the other hand, malnourished. So there is now a new emphasis. I'm delighted by that. But I'll tell you, there's some really serious problems about what they are saying about school education. Let me begin by some stats again, as usual. In 2010, we had achieved about 58% gross enrollment ratio at secondary level, classes 9 and 10 for 15 to 16-year-olds. And because there was upward pressure, because the gross enrollment ratio had lower levels had increased, thanks to a variety of factors I don't have to go into, it jumped from 58 in 2010 to 80% in 2015. And what are they saying in this policy? That they will achieve 100% gross enrollment in secondary level by 2035, 15 years from now? How poor is your ambition? Give me a break. It's not just that, it doesn't stop there. There are no children, there are no teachers at secondary level for STEM teaching. This country needs massification of STEM teaching, science, technology, engineering, and math. Otherwise, what is happening is that these kids come out of secondary, higher secondary, and over 50% of our higher education students enter what? Arts, humanities, commerce, law. क्यों? क्योंकि और कुछ बेचारे कर ही नहीं सकते, कुछ कर ही नहीं
सकते. And did a fairly good job of it. Some of us studied arts and did a good job of it. I want to take this question to Guru. This one's coming from Bharat, and he says, you know, the age-old question that we ask in our homes is that the top scorer, someone who does close to 100% goes to the top school. Anyone 60% to 45%, you're a loser. You failed. Nobody's going to want you. Has that problem been addressed? Guru?
Yeah, this actually interestingly links to what my co-panelist said some time back, saying that we need more Kendriya Vidyalaya schools in the country. Now, Kendriya Vidyalaya schools are government schools, right? So what is the reason why instead of saying I want more Kendriya Vidyalaya schools, I think what we need to say is every school should be a Kendriya Vidyalaya school.
Yes,
every school, whether
precisely.
It's run by a state government or by a municipal corporation or by a Zilla Panchayat, the biggest reason why there is a Kendriya Vidyalaya and there is a state government school and there is a corporation school is, if you see the per child budget, it will be a shocking difference. I think this warrants an investigation by itself, that all the children of India are not the children of India. There are children of India and there are children of a lesser God. Correct. And one very interesting statistic for you is, you know, the NEP is still a policy. You know, it's not an act of parliament. It's a policy, is a guideline. It is not mandatory. We have one Right to Education Act, and the Right to Education Act has a very simple annexure. And the annexure says, ek school mein ye sab hona chahiye. A school should have a classroom, should have enough teachers, should have a library, should have a compound wall for security of students, should have a sports ground and some equipment. You know, what is the percentage of schools in the country that satisfy the RT? I think if you ask anybody on the road to guess, they will be far off the mark. 10% of the schools in this country, less than 10% of the schools in this country satisfy the mandated law passed by parliament. So technically, people could go to court taking their local school and say, hey, your government of India, your parliament passed an act saying every school should have these basic things, nothing great. But it's not having. If you were able to meet this requirement, then there is no reason why you should ask for Kendriya Vidyalaya school because your neighboring school is a Kendriya Vidyalaya school. Now, Faye, you said, when I talked about financing in the beginning, you said, can we afford it? Now, if you look at the statistics across the world, India is, you know, we think we are a superpower. We are going to send something to the Mars and to Saturn and all that. We are 124th rank in the world. Can I repeat? We are 124th rank in the world in terms of per capita expenditure in education. Countries far poorer than us, including Bangladesh, including Pakistan, they spend much more than us on education. The state that's doing best in India in its school education is Kerala. They spend twice the amount that Kothari Commission asked us to spend. So absolutely, if you say there is no money for education, then I don't think we need Rafales. I don't think we need nuclear submarines. I don't think we need half the things we are spending money on. And that's the good thing about this NEP. The NEP says, put money there. I think that's the biggest thing that one can think of. Very quickly, I want to make two points. One is on technology. I am from IT for Change, and I welcome the emphasis in the NEP on use of technology. And that also connects to my co-panelist talking about online learning having become much more important now, given the COVID pandemic. She's absolutely right. Penetration figures are also meaningless because the quality of connectivity is important. You might be having a 2G, 3G connectivity and you're trying to download a video your teacher sent you and you're struggling. I'm from Bangalore and I know that the government schools within Bangalore, the teachers are scared to even send a video to the students over a WhatsApp because they know the students won't be able to access it. So
also, Guru, if you consider the number of power cuts that you have in Bangalore, that half the time students are sitting with like dead, devices on their laps with nothing to do with it.
And Bangalore and a few hundred kilometers from Bangalore is Gulbarga. So Gulbarga is like 100 times worse off than Bangalore. So India has clearly internalized a caste system, if I may say so. So the children of the Sarkari Babus, IAS officers, can go to Kendriya Vidyalayas. The children of the very poor can go to very poor schools, and that is contrary to the basic spirit of equality enshrined in the preamble to the Constitution. So I think technology, there is a welcome thrust in the NEP on technology. And one very important point I want to make here is that historically technology in school education has failed, and that is because we have always looked at technology as something that some company makes and the teachers have to use it. And we want to do technology to the teachers, but our work with school teachers, government school teachers across the country says that if teachers are a partner in this process of technology use, then the teacher development questions that you raised, how do we ensure that teachers come to the quality required? Technology can play an important role in that. But one caveat I want to bring here, it's still early days, but we're talking about data ownership. There is this non-personal data commission that was set up. The personal data issues are coming in. Who owns this data? Now, unfortunately in school education, you have companies collecting data of children, collecting data of teachers, and we are all vulnerable to data being collected about us. The NEP is silent on that, and I think it's very clearly, it's important to emphasize that the data collected by the school should belong to the school. It may look like a very esoteric point right now, but as we go ahead into the digital society, this point will become much more and more important. So these are points
Guru,
that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Before we move forward, I just want to clarify something, and this is from a lot of the questions that are popping up in the chat window, right? Because at the end of the day, anything to do with school and college is really personal to the family in India. Parents start to panic and they start to try to figure out, oh no, do we have to learn this new local language? Will our child have to go to this school, that school? So effectively, is it accurate for me to say that the national education policy is currently a vision statement, a very impressive, a very good vision statement.
Absolutely.
But in terms of implementation, we don't have a timeline. It doesn't say next year or the year after that. It also, unless we sort out the problems of teachers, of spending, and of equality, this vision statement might just remain just that, Guru?
Yeah, see, the policy document is intended to be a vision statement with specifics. So it's not a very high-level statement saying, let's make India a superpower in education. It has details on what we should do in teacher education. The chapter on teacher education is quite impressive because, for example, it says we need a 4-year bachelor's program. If engineer requires 4 years to become an engineer, if a lawyer requires 5 years, if a doctor requires 5 years, then a teacher requires 4 years. It used to be 1 year until not long back. Please remember, it was just 1 year. Now it's 2 years, and 4 years is a welcome sign. The NEP is quite detailed on many of the aspects of how to implement the vision. But usually policy documents don't put timelines. That's the job of Parliament. That's the job of the budgeting of a finance ministry, which says, I'll give you so much money. So policy documents normally do not have timelines, but it is quite detailed in nature. So I think I would not complain about that aspect as far as the policy is concerned.
Miss Paul?
See, at present, what is coming in my mind just now, what Sir said just now, here's a document, this document just mentions that the teacher education institutes to move to multidisciplinary colleges and universities by 2030. Then 10 days bagless internship with local trades and crafts person. Then Lok Vidya, that means local artists will become master instructors in school. Minimum 50 hours of in-service training per teacher per year. And the multidisciplinary thing is going to happen by 2030. If we are going to begin forthcoming, I think the present teachers, that is in-service training, should start immediately so that at least those who are already teachers will be empowered to start using this, making this NEP a reality. We can't wait till 2030. That's what I feel. Second one is regarding ICT integration. There was a plan by the Maharashtra government to give the ICT grant for various government institutes. But because of this pandemic, it has been kept on hold. Otherwise, if that grant comes in, something good would have happened. Now, since on the one hand, there is a pandemic, and the other side, we are talking about ICT integration for teaching, learning, evaluation, teacher preparation, professional development. If all this could have happened, it would make, at least in these few 2-3 months, I think things could move a little faster. And they've also said those who are not able to give TET, stringent action will be taken. That if you're not able to do teacher eligibility test, the stringent action will be taken. These are all towards quality, no doubt. But the time frame is to be given to initially to the training of teachers, training of the people who are already existing teachers all across India, whether it is a public school, a private school, a government school, a ZP school, or it's a Anganwadi, everyone will have to be empowered with some training, at least immediate training in the next 2-3 months. That is the immediate action that would have to be taken, so that we can see the NEP become a successful thing. Then they've talked about gross enrollment ratio, which Sir said 2030. We should not wait for 2030. It's wrong. I think within the next 5 years, the gross enrollment should increase with this. And then there's a special education zone. There will be certain zones will be completely set aside for education.
But Ms. Paul, do we have enough teachers? Let's assume the gross enrollment in higher education would mean we would need the infrastructure for that, right? Higher education is not Anganwadi. It requires infrastructure. Junior college and college requires infrastructure. Are we adding new seats?
No, not at all.
So then how do we, even by 2030, how do we achieve this?
By 2030, it can, what I look at it can be bifurcated into 2 parts. One, the online teaching process, and the other, the direct participation in the school or in the college campus. So try to start deviating the system into 2 parts so that we can give access to more and more people, at least through some mediums. We are actually technologically high. Certain colleges, certain universities have state-of-the-art computer lab and everything. But yet today in this pandemic, we are lagging behind. We are crying that we cannot do this and we cannot conduct an online exam. I literally say that it is possible, provided we keep our mind give our mind into it, and we can work in that direction. That if together we have a focused outlook, that strategically I look at it, first is to ensure the training of the teachers. Immediately move into the training of teachers, then moving into the strategic management of the infrastructure of the, now we're talking about all this vocational training, technical training from the standard 6th onwards. We're going to start with this. Empower our teachers so that lab is there. There is something hands-on we can use. Even in now at present in our science laboratory, we will not have all the equipments and all the machinery that is needed. What we do with the test tube and whatever little beaker, these are the things. With this, we are trying to talk about, we're going to do skill enhancement. Skill enhancement, we require certain things. Start evolving a mindset that it is no longer just knowledge, not only just memory, but it's moving towards understanding, skill, and skills simultaneously. It is possible. I remember there was a training pedagogy at St. Xavier's Dobi Talab, the Institute of Education. The year when I did my B.Ed, I remember we were the experimental samples of that year, and we had something called after we finished our teaching, we have to move in towards what we learned.
She's gotten muted by mistake.
To the extent that you have to give an idea, like what did we learn? So there is an action, then there is what you learn for your life and what you're going to do, create. So it was already there in the system, in the previous system, but unfortunately nobody could pick it up. And the principal then had to just, because she started a new way of thinking. She finally couldn't cope with the pressures of the government and pressures of the people around, and even including the staff.
Okay, Ms. Paul, unfortunately I've run out of time, but there's one interesting, point of view, an interesting article that's popped up, and I'll just quickly take this to Professor Mehrotra, if I may. I'm reading out of the Economic Times, Professor, and I'll just also put this up on the screen. It says, this is what the headline says: RSS affiliates welcome the national education policy, say 60% of their suggestions have been met. And, you know, a sort of replica of this article has popped up in several other newspapers as well. And that sort of, you know, that's interesting because most of what we've talked about has been positive, that a lot of the moves have been, you know, at least in theory, have been positive. Is this something that causes you concern, or do you think this is par for the course because, you know, a lot of people were consulted?
It's true, a lot of people were consulted. And actually, honestly, if you ask me, I haven't read every word, but I was looking out for where Sanskrit showed up and India showed up and nationalist culture showed up, etc. very carefully.
Yes.
And I was very relieved. There was very significant emphasis on pluralism, etc. No problem in Sanskrit being taught properly, etc. And people who want to study Sanskrit, and that's very fine. There's no, honestly, I was relieved. So let me not say any more than that.
All right. A lot of people will be happy that Sanskrit will now be made available across all schools and at all levels. And students will be pleased because Sanskrit is known as a scoring language and they're able to score higher in Sanskrit than they are in normal state languages. I know that was, I mean, I studied Kannada when I was in school, and the guys who did Sanskrit always did better than us. So there's an advantage there, and that's something that students will clap for. We're going to leave it here, but this is obviously for our audience a complex document. It's going to take a few days before everybody figures out, you know, the entire extent of what it means. It's going to take a lot of clarification from government as well. Invariably, you know, because education involves parents and families, people decide which city they're going to live in, which state they're going to live in. People who are going to be transferred over the next couple of days or about the next couple of years start to panic. What you need to remember is that there's no reason to panic. That one thing, that the misinformation came from the PIB press release. The Press Information Bureau put out a press release that said everyone will compulsorily have to be taught in the local language up to grade 5. That's not what the actual document says. It says only wherever possible. So that's a huge sigh of relief. So you can calm down now and not worry about it. The rest of it is a policy document, and we're going to figure it out. It's not happening tomorrow. We know that for sure, or even over the next academic year. It's going to take some time. So it's an interesting thing to read through. And my only word right now is, while it is promising and it seems to give us vision and direction in the right point of view, don't let it keep you up at night for the time being, at least. It makes sense to read it, write out if you have any objections, do communicate it to the government. That's what a citizen's responsibility is. But we do hope that this will solve a couple of the problems. The problems of, you know, feeding midday meals to very, very small children in the Anganwadis, teaching them better, preparing them better for the world. The second problem of exams causing so much pressure. Do you know that India has the highest instance of suicide among students in the world? The highest instance. The fact that the largest cause of death for young women between the ages of 15 and 30 is suicide. And that's because we put that kind of pressure on our students when they're taking exams. Hopefully this will reduce that pressure, give them more opportunities, give them more learning. And because the government has written on paper that education deserves more funding from government, one hopes the next time that they're actually writing out a state or a central budget, that education will receive more funding. It is complicated, but I've always believed that education and healthcare are the silver bullets. If we feed our children properly from the ages 0 to 5, and by our children, I mean the poorest children in our country, and we give them good, solid, proper education where the teachers show up and they know what they're talking about, we will create a superpower. Until then, it's just all talk. Until we reach the last child in our country and make sure they're fed and taught, it's all talk. All right. I'm going to leave it there, and we will come back to education because it's complex. I just want to remind our viewers that Kerala has the best rates of education in the country. It also has lower crime rate, better rates of gender ratio, lower, it has a better per capita income. It has a lower fertility rate, which means fewer babies are being born. Everything improves when you improve education. Leaving it there and thanking our panelists and thanking my audience. Thank you so much. Good night.